Welcome back, Honors. All right, so we just finished up today talking about the Byzantine, right? So we just finished up talking about the Byzantine, and if we didn't, I'm sure I'm going to supplement it in some way. I'm probably going to send that PowerPoint out just so you can get the last little bit of notes off that or something like that. But anyway, we're not going to worry about that too much right now because we got a flip to do. All right, so the entire time that we've been leading into this new unit, right? Europe post the fall of Rome. Western civilization post fall of the most Western civilization that there ever was, right? So we talked about Rome, and we talked about its expanse and how Rome had such a massive effect on all of Europe, all of Western civilization, because they took over most of the known civilized world at the time. If you name a European country, there's a good to solid chance that Rome controlled a part of it at one given point or another, right? France, Spain, Portugal, the United Kingdom, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Liechtenstein, you're talking about a lot of area, right? That's not even including the Balkans and Greece and Turkey and then the eastern portion of the empire as well. So when Rome falls, all right, so Europe enters what's known as the medieval period. MEDIEVAL. Now, before we even get started, let's go ahead and kind of define that, shall we? Now, the medieval period, or medieval, right, is actually a word of Latin origin, and it can kind of, it relates to the Middle Ages. So when you hear certain things being referenced throughout this unit, you need to know they're all the same thing. The Middle Ages, the medieval, era, the medieval Europe, Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, quote unquote, right, is usually what we're talking about when we're referring to this entire era, right? So now, the Dark Ages, quote unquote, why was it so often referred to as a Dark Age? Now, really quick question too, did they call it a Dark Age when they were in it? No, just like they didn't call the Byzantine Empire the Byzantine when they were in it. They called it Rome, just like also they call the Dark Ages just the ages, all right? So, well, we call it the Dark Ages now because after the Renaissance began over 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, it's going to start creating this idea that this era of intelligence and the rebirth of Greek and Roman culture must start here around 1350, 1450, this big gray area, right? And then everything before that and past the fall of Rome, this middle area should begin to refer to as a Dark Age because no one was smart anymore, right? Well, it was referred to that by a very famous writer known as Petrarch, 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 right? He was the first one to coin this idea of the Dark Ages, right? Well, he's a Renaissance writer. Of course he's going to call it a Dark Age, right? But he called it that due to the fact that you had limited learning, poor leadership, bad economics, which basically means a breakdown in trade, right? Trade almost did not exist during the Middle Ages, right? So especially for Western Europe, right? Because they had no way to do it. They didn't have fleets of boats. They didn't have carts paths. They didn't have the Roman infrastructure. They didn't have all this stuff anymore. So they considered it like, ugh. All right, now, where's that bias? Well, again, when we looked at the Eastern empires, what are the Eastern empires doing? Yes, Mr. Terry. Oh, I don't know, kicking butt, all right? So they're growing. The Africans, the Asians, the Arabs, the Byzantinians, they're doing great. It's just this little nugget of, Europe was really struggling, right? So whenever we look at it, right, like this right here, this is the Umayyad Caliphate. This is the Muslim empire at its peak. Look at what it controlled. Look at the fact that they controlled Spain for a long period of time. You can see it in their architecture in southern Spain. You can literally see, hold on, let me look at that. Muslim architecture in Spain. Yeah, so that's how big the Muslim empire grew to be at one point, right? So, look at it. Look at it. Look at how gorgeous it is. Look at the amount of Muslim-style architecture that existed even in a portion of Europe, right? So, don't forget, the Muslims were in Spain, all right? So, everyone else was doing great. It was the Western Europeans that just weren't doing so hot. So really quick, when we define the medieval period or the Middle Ages, where does it fall? Now, a lot of y'all are immediately going to look at this and you're going to be like, well, that makes sense. Or some of you are going to be like, I'm confused. Well, if you want, instead of going, go maybe straight down, all right? Go ancient times, medieval Europe, the modern era, right? So defining the medieval European period is when you look at medieval Europe, you're basically referring to the fact that it's in the middle, right? So the ancient times or classical civilizations, when we're measuring historiographically, when we're actually looking at time, we're looking at the Neolithic Revolution when we learned how to develop farming, all the way up until about the fall of Rome, right? Fall of Rome and before that is all your ancient civilizations and your classical civilization, right? Classical as in old, right? So classical as in also great achievement. So Greece, Rome, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Phoenicians, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, all that's a part of classical era, right? Then Rome falls. And when we enter into the medieval period, it's from the fall of Rome to the Renaissance. And if you want a way to look at it, the medieval period is a transitional phase. It's a transitional phase from ancient civilizations to the now modern era, which is the Renaissance to today, all right? Now, a lot of historians, garble this up, and they're like, the Renaissance didn't even happen. All right, so, we're going to, for our sake, it makes it more understandable, all right? It's called the Middle Ages because it's where? It's in the middle, all right? So, it's called the Middle Ages because literally it's in the middle. This time period is also known as the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, right? And what this whole thing is it happens in stages as well. Remember, we had Kingdom, Republic, Empire. We had Neolithic, Early Bronze, Minoan, Mycenaean, Dark Ages, Archaic, Classical, Hellenistic, right? Everything's got time periods. Everything has time periods. So in this one, we've got 3 time periods, right? We've got Emily hates Lucifer, all right? So Miss Lannon does hate Lucifer, all right? So Emily is early Middle Ages. High Middle Ages, hates, right? And then the late Middle Ages, the Lucifer part, late Middle Ages. And it works perfectly because the late Middle Ages were and they were really, really bad. All right, so the early Middle Ages goes from about 500 to 1000 AD. The High Middle Ages goes from about 1000 to 1300 AD. The late Middle Ages goes from 1300 to 1500 AD, give or take. All right, so the big thing about it, though, going forward, is who are the people involved in these Middle Ages, right? If the Romans controlled everything, then who's doing anything in the Middle Ages, right? Well, the beginning of the Middle Ages, of course, is those invasions, right? The fall of Rome was caused a lot by these Western barbarians invading everything, right? The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, all these different groups. And you saw the end of the Roman emperors when the Ostrogoths came in and deposed the 16-year-old emperor, right? So Rome falls due to these barbarian invasions. Well, now, thanks a lot, barbarians, you're now responsible for reestablishing Europe, all right? So for those of you in this, listening to this flip right now, chances are you're descendant of a barbarian, right? So I myself am descendant of Angles, Saxons, Celts, and some Gauls as well, and also some Native Americans, but we're not referring to them as barbarians, they're Native Americans, right? Barbarian is a person who is believed to be uncivilized, but in the European scape, jot this down, it's basically just anyone who's not Roman, all right? So if you weren't Roman, right, if you weren't Roman in Italy, if you were roaming around, all right, so if you were roaming around outside of Italy, you were considered a barbarian, right? Barbarian, of course, coming from the Greek word of barbar, which means to babble, all right? So which means literally being because the Romans couldn't understand it. And as time progressed forward, the Romans began to refer to them as being uncivilized, right? So, they don't even water down their wine. That was one of the big reasons why Romans actually thought that barbarians were savage in a sense, is because they drank wine straight instead of watering it down so they could drink it all day, right? Barbarians drank for other reasons. But anyway, they're also not that uncivilized. They're just behind the 8 ball, all right? So, actually, they're not even behind the 8 ball. Rome calling the barbarians uncivilized is kind of like Bill Gates calling regular people stupid. You know what I mean? Shut up, you're Bill Gates. You know what I mean? It's the Romans were just massively intelligent. The barbarians were just tribal people. They were just trying to figure themselves out, right? They're not that uncivilized. The people who call them uncivilized, of course, is the Romans, right? And they, a lot of the barbarians began to conquer in pursuit of land. This is what people imagine when they think barbarian. Oh, big husky guy. He's got 8 swords and he's going to come take everything and he's a big dude. Nah, not really. It's not really what it looked like. This is what a barbarian looked like, right? Wooden shield, had a loose understanding of how to forge things like iron, right? But they didn't have the complex society that the Romans had, right? Notice he's wearing a tunic and he's wearing his weapons, and like it's a very, very different thing, right? But don't judge the barbarians. Don't be harsh to the barbarians. They had kings and governments, sort of. All right, so they were small, and they had like little tribes that had like chiefs and chieftains that eventually evolved into like kings and stuff. But like at first, it's starting out small. All right, so now, and they had money. Eventually, all right, eventually as time progressed forward and Romans weren't making money anymore, barbarians themselves even began to make money and use it as a form of exchange, right? So, but they're also responsible for settling all of Europe, right? So, for example, check this example out, all right? So, all right, hold on. Here's a good example, right? So, some of y'all are going to write it down in your notes, but you're more than welcome to, but you don't even necessarily have to. So if you look at, for example, the progression of words throughout history, right? Titles, countries, governments, whatever you want to say. All right, so let's just get this a little bit closer, shall we? All right, there we go. So you have the country known as England, right? So, well, let's talk about England for a hot second, all right? England, the way this word comes from, originally, when it was spoken by the Romans and spelt by them, it was actually in Latin spelt like this. Angleland, or as in the land of the Angles, right? So the Angles were a barbarian tribe, right? And they settled what is modern day now England. Right? So that is why it's called the land of the Angles, known as Angleland, and eventually when it was translated out of Latin, it translated into just England, right? So that word, still a popular word now. We're still talking about barbarians in our common speech, right? When we say Germany, it's because it was home to the Germanic tribes, right? When we say, what's another one? When we say France, it's because we're referring to the Franks, right? So, like, literally, these people settled all of Europe, and you need to understand that, right? And that's why it's called English, or as an Anglish, or the language of the Angles, right? So, now, you have a buttload of them, too, right? Like, you've got tons and tons and tons of barbarian groups. The ones coming from the Asian sector were the Huns and the Magyars, right? And the Magyars are actually even going to like settle like Hungary. That's like they have a lot of like whenever you actually call Hungary in Hungarian, it's called Magyar. All right, so like and then the Huns and the Magyars though they settle Russia and Eastern Europe, right? And then from the Germanic north you had the Saxons, the Angles, all the Goths, right? The Ostrogoths, the Visigoths. You had the Gauls, right? The Gauls. The Celts, add the Celts on there, C-E-L-T-S, the Celts settled Ireland and areas like that. The Danes, write the Danes down. The Danes settled Denmark, also known as the Vikings, all right, so like the Vikings. Now, anyway, so look at all these different people. You have the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Angles, the Saxons, and eventually the Angles and the Saxons interbred together and created Anglo-Saxons. All right, so the Franks from Central Europe. You can pause this real quick, but I got to keep rolling. I don't want to take up too much of y'all's time. But then eventually the barbarians are going to organize. Hooray! All right, so like around like the 500s, they're going to organize under one guy, and we're going to talk about him tomorrow. All right, so but barbarian tribes are eventually going to put hereditary leaders into power. They're going to begin to make permanent settlements in Europe, and even though single-handedly destroyed all things of intelligence up to that point, they're trying. They're doing their best. All right, so and there's one thing too that actually many of them actually were imbibing with. Post-fall of Rome, many of them began to convert to Christianity. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so but I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. I hope you all have a great evening. Have a good one.